Hello and welcome to the Farmhouse. I'm Candace Wierzbowski.
And I'm Stephanie Speicher.
And in a moment, we are going to be talking to Katie Speicher, who is a very special guest this week because she is actually Stephanie's sister. But before we get into Katie and what she does, Stephanie has a little treat.
All right, yes, little treats time. So earlier this month in August, I got to spend a whole day up at Penn State's Ag Progress Days. And while I was there, I attended a presentation on native bees because we love bees around here.
Very pro-bee.
Very pro-bee. So the talk was held by Sarah Kania, who is a researcher with Penn State's Department of Entomology. And Kania and her team are working with master gardeners on the Pennsylvania Bee Monitoring Program, which started back in 2021 to increase the understanding of Pennsylvania's 437 species of native bees. And yeah, you heard that right. 437 species.
My son was recently asking me how many kinds of bees there are, and my estimation was way off.
Oh, well, in the whole world, I believe it was over 20,000.
Wow. Okay, I think I said like 15.
Yeah, okay. You might need to go back and let
revisit.
Him know. So through the Pennsylvania Bee Monitoring Program, the Master Gardener volunteers will trap bees and then send them to Kania's lab for identification and evaluation. And so far during the program, they have gathered about 300 different species here in PA. So basically, Kania and her team are using this information to determine how many of those 437 species still live in PA, and then to also track the bees' migration patterns and how they're changing due to climate change. So for example, have some of the bees left the state to go north? And also there are some new bee species that used to live farther south that now are living in Pennsylvania. So if you're like us and you love bees, you can read all about the native Pennsylvania bees and this project at lancasterfarming.com, and we will have the article linked in the show notes.
And we also have plenty of articles on how to attract bees and other pollinators to your garden if you're interested in that too. So, like I said, today our guest is Katie Speicher. Katie, in addition to being Stephanie's sister, is also the assistant farm manager at Poughkeepsie Farm Project, which is a vegetable farm up in, you guessed it, Poughkeepsie, New York. We'll let Katie explain exactly what she does there and what's so special about the farm. But one thing before we start with that we should tell you is that Stephanie will not be taking part in this episode. You know, she had to do it on her own last week, and now it's my turn.
Yeah, we figured that I know Katie so well. We are only a year apart, so she's been in my life for all 29 years of my life, because she's a year older than me. That Katie and I don't know if you guys have seen the social media trend, because you people aren't all chronically online like I am, but there's this joke going around of sister languages and how basically you have your own language when you're close with your siblings. So because I know Katie so well and we can, you know, talk in our own language.
Like a shorthand.
Yeah, our little shorthand. I think the interview and everything will go a lot better if I take a step back and let Candace and Katie talk, so you guys get a full legitimate conversation and not just me and Katie goofing off. So I talk to her all the time. We goof off enough.
Right, and I can't wait to meet Katie and hear what she has to say. All right, so let's dive in. Katie, welcome to the Farmhouse.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I feel like this is almost like when we have our coworkers in the studio with us, because you're also like Lancaster Farming family adjacent. It's kind of nice. Mm-hmm. All right, so did you always want to work in agriculture?
No. Like, I wanted to always work outside. I knew that was like where I felt happiest. But I do feel like the kind of farms that we grew up around were like conventional dairies mostly, and like mostly a lot of like corn, soy kind of production, a lot of family farms that were like multi-generational. And I didn't see a place for myself in that kind of agriculture. So it really wasn't until I started volunteering on smaller vegetable farms where I was like, oh, this is a really great way to like spend time outdoors, get connected with my food, and yeah, I just really took an interest in it.
Cool. Tell me about the Poughkeepsie Farm Project and what you do there.
Yeah, so Poughkeepsie Farm Project was founded in 1999. It was part of like the CSA movement of the greater Northeast area. So it was founded strictly as a CSA farm, and CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. So farms seek out shareholders who will purchase like a seasonal share in advance, which funds the farm up front, and then come on a regular schedule to pick up their share of the vegetables. And it's kind of a buy-in opportunity where like you're funding the farm, and if it does super well, you really reap the benefits. But if there's, a weather event or something that is out of your control, you're right there with your farmer.
Yeah, the risk of
So
investing.
yes, definitely. That was the origins. Now in 2024, we still have a large CSA. We've got over 300 members, but we also donate a large amount of what we grow. So we're aiming to donate about 40,000 pounds of food a year to local food access networks. We sell to local restaurants. And then we run a whole host of educational programming. So we have a whole education team that employs interns in the summer. We do field trips to the farm. They go to elementary schools or local schools and do in-classroom visits. And then they also maintain a bunch of community gardens. So the farm project as a whole is doing a lot of stuff in and around the Poughkeepsie area.
That's awesome to hear. So PFP is certified naturally grown.
Mhm.
What does that mean in terms of your growing practices, and how does it differ from being certified organic?
Yeah, it's very, very similar to certified organic, but kind of geared towards like the smaller farmers. So like certified organic, the way the regulations are written are really meant for larger producers. And so it's a much more intensive process to become certified organic. And it also requires like yearly dues, and you have to get inspected by like organic organizations that come and inspect. And certified naturally grown is a peer-to-peer review process. So any other farms that are around here that are also certified naturally grown, like you just have another farmer come and inspect your farm on an annual basis. So we're essentially using certified organic practices, but
Not
it's
jumping through so many hoops.
it's yeah, less barriers to entry, I would say.
Okay. So PFP's vision is, and I'm quoting here, a community that works collaboratively to provide equitable access to nutritious food via a just and resilient food system. What are some things that the farm is doing to bring that vision to life?
Yeah, so many things. I guess starting from like the production standpoint, you already mentioned that we are certified naturally grown, so we do really value our soil. We don't use any sort of chemical pesticides, so like we really want the land to remain healthy and like a thriving ecosystem and produce like the most nutritiously dense food as possible. And then in terms of like where that food is going, we receive like some really awesome grant funding that allows us to give away a lot of food for free. And some of that goes to other organizations that do like, emergency food access or food pantries or prepared meals or whatnot. And then a lot of it is through our CSA program. So we're able to offer CSA shares to folks who are on SNAP, so they can use their SNAP to purchase a share. We also have sponsored shares, which are specifically for BIPOC folks who live in the city of Poughkeepsie. So we're really like targeting like the local community that is highest need, to give out as much food as we can.
That's awesome. I feel like we've been talking to a few people recently about food food justice and efforts that various organizations are partaking in to make sure that people are getting healthy food because, obviously there is, SNAP and WIC, but those don't always lend themselves to the healthiest eating habits depending on where people are obtaining their food. So it's nice to hear that, all these efforts are out there for people who, are in need.
Yes.
So the PFP website says that healthy food starts with healthy soil, and the soil there is classified as, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing this incorrectly, husic gravelly loam, which the website says is ideal soil. Now, this is, I guess, your chance to nerd out a little because I know you have a background in soil science. What makes soil good quality for agriculture, and how can growers improve soil that might not be ideal?
Mm. I mean, I think a big piece of it is just like the landscape history. So like our farm sits in what was very likely an ancient floodplain of the Hudson River. So,
Interesting. Okay.
those kind of soils form very slowly over time. And so older soils are always more mineral dense. So, just picking a good location is kind of what gives you the best soil. But our soil is like miraculously rock free, which really just reduces everyone's stress. Like there's nothing worse than like hoeing and hitting a rock every 2 feet. So,
Yeah. I know that from like just like a
lucky.
very scaled down version in my own vegetable garden at home. I have
Uh-huh.
extremely rocky soil in my backyard. And every season I'm like, how can there still be so many rocks after I've been
Yeah.
like working at this for like 5 years now?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I will say because our land has been in production as Poughkeepsie Farm Project for 25 years, and prior to that, it was part of Vassar's farm. Um, our soil is pretty low on organic matter, so we're definitely always adding, like every season, we add more compost, we incorporate cover crops into our rotation. Like we're pretty mindful of the fact that like much of that organic matter has already been worked through, which, if you're using a piece of land over a long expanse of time, definitely happens in agriculture.
Tell me about the community harvest at PFP. What are they and like what are the vibes there?
It's super fun. This is like the first farm I've been at that does this, and I'm so happy we do because it's like essentially a gleaning effort. So like, if a crop is like past its prime or like we're ready to turn over a field and there's still like a lot of edible food out there, it's really unfortunately not worth like the farmer's time to spend like, a whole day harvesting it. So our education team puts out a call to their network for a community harvest, and we get, typically like 20 to 30 people come out to the farm, and they will just like glean like a whole field, a whole area. And they're welcome to take home as much as they can use and like give it to their neighbors. But then whatever they harvest that like can't be used because it's always like a very large amount of food, goes directly to our food access partners. So
Okay.
it's a good vibe. It only takes a couple of hours, like when you have like 25 people harvesting like a whole, like for example, we have two high tunnels, and in the winter we grow greens for our winter CSA, and then we turn them over into tomatoes and cucumbers. So at the end of winter, early spring, we're pulling out everything from the tunnel. So we had people come and just clear the whole tunnels. And these tunnels are like 200 feet by, I'm going to say like 30 to 40 feet. So it's like a pretty big
Large.
tunnel.
Yeah.
Yeah. And people just like were pulling out like whole spinach plants, right? And like putting them into bags. And like
Yeah.
it's also great because there's people of different cultures who like recognize certain foods that we grow and are so excited. Like we had like bok choy that was flowering, and so we had some folks of Asian descent come, and they were like actually so excited to get the flowers. And like, people who aren't familiar with that don't know how to use it, so it's like great to just see all the parts of our plants being eaten and used used.
Yeah, that's
And
awesome. I was not aware that eating bok choy flowers was a thing, so I'm gonna have to look that up.
Mhm.
All right, so you farmed in Maryland, Virginia, and now in New York. Are
Mhm.
there any differences in growing produce between the three states that you've noticed?
Maryland was so humid. Oh my God. I mean, I was like a ripe young 22-year-old in Maryland, so I was just like so excited to be there. But
Mm-hmm.
man, that was hot and humid. That's all I remember. Virginia, you know what? We were like right at the base of the Shenandoah Mountains, and so it's actually been weirdly surprising how similar climate-wise the Hudson Valley, like lower Hudson Valley of New York, is to like mountainous Virginia. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, I mean, it tends to be like a tiny bit hotter there, but
Mm-hmm.
it's very similar, like growing season. So that's been surprising to me.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm glad that you're like out of the swampiness of Maryland. That does not sound like a fun time. Important work, I'm sure, right? But
Mhm.
yeah, sweaty work as well. All right, so tell me about your time serving in the Peace Corps. What are some agricultural practices you were able to help introduce in Senegal, and what are some that you brought back home?
Wow, where to start? So I was working in agroforestry. So I was essentially serving as an extension agent. So like kind of similar, like Pennsylvania has the Penn State Extension, and those folks, do a lot of like they're just like resource hubs. And that's essentially what my role was as a Peace Corps volunteer. So I was living in a village. I was given a bunch of like tree seeds, and so I was like working with farmers there to grow a bunch of tree seedlings that could be incorporated into their farms in some way or another. So like some of it was thorny native trees that would work as live fences.
Oh, okay.
Um, because like fencing materials are pretty costly. So if you can plant a tree and it serves as a fence, then it's a cheaper, more sustainable route. And then some of them were interested in starting like cashew orchards or mango orchards or something like. So that was like, obviously pretty new to me. It was a very different environment than what I was used to and different like seasonality. So I learned a lot about like, the importance of like seasonal rain. Like all of their agriculture is rain fed. They don't really irrigate.
Okay.
And one of the effects that they've been noticing from climate change is that their rainy season, like the older folks there all said like our rainy season used to be 6 months. And like when I was there, it was 3 to 4 max. So
Oh,
like it really
yikes.
affects their growing season and the longevity of their crops.
Interesting. Are they using any kind of like mitigation techniques to help with that? I mean, I know you said that they don't irrigate, but is there anything else they're doing to help?
Um, it's interesting. Like the one of their staples is like using growing millet as a grain or growing sorghum as a grain. And both of those plants are native to that area, so they're like super drought tolerant.
Okay.
So like those as food sources are like really awesome. But part of like the colonial history there is that the French wanted to use that land for rice production,
Mm,
which is a very water intensive crop. And so the culture has like since the I don't know 1950s 60s has really shifted towards a much more rice heavy diet, which they're not really able to produce as much.
that's really interesting and
Yeah.
unfortunate. What are some of the things that you might have brought back home with you from when you came back?
Man, I don't know. I mean, like agriculturally, it's hard to transfer. Like,
Yeah.
although interestingly enough, like one of the major cash crops in Senegal is peanuts, and
Hmm.
there have been a lot of trials with peanut farming in this part of the US. So I know PASA is working, they have like research money that they're working with like farmers in Pennsylvania to grow peanuts, which is just like so cool. And kind of surprising that it's like successful. Because peanuts require like a really long growing season, which like you just don't always get in Pennsylvania. Um, but yeah, I just thought that was super interesting because like I was surrounded by peanuts in Senegal and didn't know it could be done here. So,
All right. So, what does being a woman in ag mean to you?
well, I feel pretty lucky to work on a farm that is like almost entirely like female bodied people. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's like never the assumption that like, our one male coworker is like the guy who drives the tractor, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we like there's six of us who drive the tractor and five of us are not men. So I feel super lucky to work just like in an environment where there's not like an assumption of gender roles with like those kind of like tasks that perhaps in other places would be more, I don't know, more challenging to like step up and take on as a woman.
Yeah, I get
Um,
it.
yeah. So I don't know if that's what it means to be a woman in ag, though. I'll have to think about that.
It's, what it means for you to be a woman in ag and where you are
Mhm.
right now in your life. So, I think that that's valid.
Yeah, I think it's empowering. I think like having, I don't know, just like a hand in like food, it's like to me, having a hand in like food is like synonymous with like having a hand in community. And like, I do think just like being able to like do the outreach and make connections with community and like be, look at the land and growing with compassion is just such a powerful thing.
That is an awesome way of thinking of it. Yeah, I like that. All right. Well, Katie, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I really appreciate it. And I feel like I learned a lot, not just about the fact that you can eat bok choy flowers, but yeah.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me.
I really liked talking to Katie, and that should come as no surprise because she and Stephanie are very similar, and I really enjoy talking to Stephanie. In fact, on the About Us section for the Poughkeepsie Farm Project, on Katie's section of the page, she lists that her guilty pleasures are drinking too much coffee, being an unabashed Swiftie, and loving Penn State football. And you can use all of those phrases to describe Stephanie.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, I joked beforehand that you guys are kind of like the same person, but different fonts. So
Yes.
It was nice to spend time with her.
People used to think we were twins, which we're not, so.
I can believe it. I can believe it. So pivoting a little from Katie, we got some news recently about one of our past guests, Krista Barfield, and she is of Farmer John fame, and something unfortunate recently happened with Farmer John, and Stephanie's going to go into that.
Yeah, so it's a tough story to hear, to report, but unfortunately there was a hate crime committed at Farmer John pretty recently. Someone graffitied some pretty awful things there, and it's just really unfortunate that is even something we have to talk about, that it's something that's happening in general at a place that is aiming to do so much good in the community.
Right.
And so, Krista basically decided to take this terrible thing and turn it into something good. So they just this past weekend basically held an event at the farm for unity, to bring everyone together and to promote all those incredible kind of principles that they have at the farm, and to put the hate in the past and to move forward.
Right. I think it's important that they're using this opportunity to, remind people that positivity and love and lightness are stronger than, darkness and hatred that's unfortunately out there. So we are wishing Farmer John and Krista and all of her cohort the very best. And I can't wait to hear, about the event and how they were able to turn things around.
to end this on a little bit of a lighter note, if you stick around to the very end of the episode, you will hear a very special message from my dog niece. Her name is Kalua, and she has a lot to say at the very end, so stick around.
She made a little cameo after the interview.
I had to say hi to her.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you for listening. If you like this episode, please consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. And if you really like this episode, please consider leaving us a review.
If you have any questions or thoughts about this episode or the podcast in general, you can email us at farmhouse@lancasterfarming.com.
You can also find us on social media at Lancaster Farming on most platforms.
Thank you again for visiting the farmhouse. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Candace.
We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
This episode of The Farmhouse is copyright 2024 by Lancaster Farming newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family.
It was written by Stephanie Speicher and Candace Wierzbowski. It was produced by Eric Herlock and Matt Lee. The music you've heard throughout the show is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow.
Kalua, come on.
Kalua,
Can you bark on command?
Kalua, are you a stink?
Are you
Stink? Are
She's
you
like not
stink?
happening.
Stink? Kalua, stink? Yeah.
Did you intentionally train her to do that?
No, I sure did.
We did.
Okay.
We trained her to bark. And it's like a howl bark.
Are
I love
you?
it. Oh, Kalua.
It's amazing.
Are you? You?